Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I was enjoying a bowl of muesli at the kitchen table when a sudden loud knock on the door caught me off guard. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wondered who might come early on Sunday morning. Walking across the tiled floor and opening the door, I found a man in his 40s, dressed in a rumpled, inexpensive suit. 3 uniformed policemen towered behind him, making it clear that this was far from an ordinary Sunday morning. "Mr. Yang?" the man in the suit asked, flashing his badge. "Would you mind if we came in to ask you a few questions?" "I can only talk to one person at a time, Detective. What's your name?" "Robinson. Detective Charlie Robinson. I'm going to ask the questions, Mr. Mitchell. These officers would like to inspect your house if you don't mind," he said. "Do you have a warrant?" I replied. "I've seen enough crime series and I know that in order to enter my house uninvited, you need a warrant," I said firmly. "Unfortunately, we don't have a warrant," the officer replied. "I ask your permission for these officers to search your house. You have the right to refuse." "Then I'll have to get a warrant," the detective conceded. I couldn't remember what I might be hiding, but their intentions were unclear. Maybe there are prohibited materials stored on my laptop. It didn't sound familiar. Maybe a few hidden bodies in the freezer. It seemed unlikely. Well, yes, maybe a few pirated DVDs. "You're not from Interpol, are you?" I asked impulsively. "Not at all, Mr. Yang. Believe me, we are not interested in any pirated films," the detective said, slowly shaking his head. People always seem to worry about it. "Could you explain what's going on?" I asked politely. "It's quite unusual for this area. Why would you search my house?" "Mister, there's been a murder and I'm investigating it. The officers are helping me. Do you have any reason to refuse my request?" Detective Robinson asked. "No," I replied. "I can. I don't want a crowd of strangers wandering around my house. The floor is clean, and I would like it to stay that way. Otherwise, my wife will be upset when she wakes up." "Is that a good enough reason? Should I take you to the station and hold you there for 5 or 6 hours while my colleagues get a search warrant for your immaculate house?" Robinson chuckled. "Gentlemen, you can search here while I keep Detective Robinson occupied," I replied to the 3 uniformed officers. Why they wanted to search my house so badly was unclear to me, but I was sure that they would not find anything particularly disturbing. Maybe only those annoying tags that the children tore off the mattresses and carried past the cash register 15 years ago. Well, if the situation gets out of control, Robinson can go to the university and arrest both my sons. At that time, I did not even think to warn them about the illegality of these labels. I motioned Robinson to a chair as 3 uniformed officers entered the kitchen. It seemed to me that they slowed down and stopped at the island in the center of the room, almost in unison, looking in my direction. "Just one each," I muttered, as a trio of officers attacked my box of fresh donuts. A few minutes before they arrived, I picked up a dozen jelly goodies, and the sweet aroma clearly awakened their instincts. Just at that moment, my wife Vanessa came into the kitchen, moving cautiously, clutching the collar of her robe tightly. "What's going on, Oliver? Why the hell are the cops wandering around our house and eating donuts?" she asked, concern written all over her face. "Has something happened?" she added anxiously. "Vanessa, this is Detective Robinson. I hope that he will be able to shed light on the situation with his questions." I motioned for them to look around. That's what I called the search that Robinson started. "Detective, this is my wife, Vanessa. Explain why you're here. Investigating a murder? Mr. Christopher Turner was shot at around midnight yesterday. I think you both knew him?" "Yes, you did," I replied. He was Vanessa's boss, and it became clear that Robinson had a long list of potential alleged suspects. Cuckolds from this guy bred faster than rabbits. Maybe even an army of jealous husbands, I joked, feeling no remorse about the death of my wife's former employer. No one else seemed to find it funny. Vanessa's expression turned ashen white, and tears glistened in her eyes. Robinson just nodded, his gaze fixed on me. Apart from Vanessa's quiet sobs, there was a heavy tension in the room. "Mrs. Yang, how long have you been involved with your employer, Christopher Turner?" the detective asked. I didn't have an affair with him, Vanessa replied, her voice trembling. It was more of a passing relationship. I didn't love him or anything like that. We first met about 6 months ago. And I wouldn't hurt anyone, especially Bob. Mrs. Yang, I hadn't thought about it. I'm just trying to piece together all the facts, Robinson said in an indifferent tone. How did your husband react to your affair with Mr. Turner? Was he jealous? Was he angry when he found out about it? Oliver didn't know about my infidelity until that moment, Mr. Robinson. We have never had any conversations on this topic. I have no doubt Oliver would have been upset, but that wouldn't have pushed him to kill Bob, Vanessa replied, although her conviction was less than I would have preferred from my wife. Really? The detective chuckled mockingly. Mr. Yang, tell me, how would you answer the same questions? They began an affair in early August of this year, I replied calmly, just after the Turners' dinner party. Due to problems at work, I was called early. He offered Vanessa a ride home and ended up making love to her in the back seat of his SUV. It doesn't bother me because Vanessa and I have an agreement. In fact, we are free to date whomever we want, and we are dating. Vanessa has decided to be with Turner. It was strictly between the two of them. When I told her about it, Vanessa almost fell to the floor. She took a moment to process the information I had just shared with the detective. I could see her thoughts slowly turning over in her head. Why have I never heard of this so-called understanding? Vanessa asked, clearly displeased. Why didn't I know about this? Because that's what behind the scenes means, dear, I replied quickly. If we were in conversation, I would call it an oral agreement. But if we had drawn it up in writing and notarized it, it would have been a written agreement. Our understanding is just unspoken. Well, it would be great if I were informed, Vanessa remarked. I had to put in a lot of effort to keep you in the dark about Bob. In the future, I think we should clearly state all our agreements, or even put them in writing. Such constant confusion is very frustrating. Acknowledging her displeasure, Robinson reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small tape recorder. I should inform you both that I am writing down everything you say. Mrs. Yang, did you have relationships with other men? Or was Mr. Turner your only partner? Of course I was, Vanessa replied, perhaps too categorically. I am a married woman. How did it even occur to you to ask me about this? Detective Robinson asked. Did your husband take advantage of this unspoken agreement, or was he completely devoted to you? Vanessa replied, a little defensively. Oliver would never break our marriage vows. He's as loyal as an old dog. You can put it on the record. Then the detective turned to me. Mr. Yang, I repeat the same questions for you. Do you think you agree with your wife's statements? I replied, Vanessa has been with her colleague, Douglas Lewis, since mid-September. Apart from these two aforementioned gentlemen, she is as devoted to me as the geyser named after her in one of our national parks. Vanessa let out a soft sob. The detective remarked, You seem to be very knowledgeable, Mr. Yang. Even more surprising is your apparent lack of emotion. Most men would react angrily to the idea that their wife has two lovers. But why are you so calm? I explained. We have an unspoken agreement. Vanessa talked openly about her adventures, and I preferred to be more restrained, if you get my point. I grinned faintly. Vanessa looked like she was on the verge of a breakdown. Her eyes stopped watering. Instead, they seemed to bulge out of their sockets. Instead of the usual pallor, a bright red color appeared on his face, and his left hand was clutching a jelly donut. The filling oozed through her fingers, splattering her robe, but she seemed completely oblivious to this outrage. So you're saying that you also had a mistress? The astonished detective demanded clarification. And your wife didn't seem to know about it. Who did you have an affair with, and when did it start, Mr. Mitchell? You have a very sharp insight. No wonder you became a detective before you turned 50, I said with a grin. I remembered the first time I spent a night with Coraline Turner in mid-August, just 2 days after her husband had an affair with Vanessa in the back seat of his car. From that time on, we managed to be together almost every weekday, and I couldn't help but remember it fondly. This adventurous girl definitely had a passion for intimacy. Taken aback, Vanessa raised her hand to her forehead, inadvertently smearing the jelly she was holding on it. She seemed completely oblivious to this, while Robinson, too courteous to point it out, struggled to form a coherent thought. "My God," he finally said. "Did you have a relationship with the widow of the murder victim? Have you been with Coraline Turner every weekday?" I even had to flaunt it. Jelly trickled down Vanessa's face, and she sank into a chair, almost fainting. Robinson was swallowing a small pill similar to the nitroglycerin that my Uncle Derek sometimes took for heart problems. Gathering his thoughts, Robinson began to act. "Mr. Yang, you need to understand that you are related to the wives of two men who are also related to your wife. There can be no simple coincidence here. I can tell you that I have seen Mrs. Lewis, and she is very beautiful. I'm not going to dictate to you what conclusions you should draw, but I had a relationship with these two women right after their husbands were with Vanessa. It's all about revenge sleeping with the wives of your wife's lovers. Passionate revenge is even more satisfying, and I was lucky enough to feel this exciting surge of strength." "So, you killed Christopher Turner in order to repay him for having an affair with your wife?" Robinson exclaimed. "But you were intimate with his wife every weekday. Isn't that enough for you?" He demanded an answer. "The answer to both of your questions is a categorical no. In time you will understand my true revenge," I assured him. "What questions did you just answer no to?" the baffled detective asked, setting up the recorder to play back his previous inquiries. "So you're saying you didn't kill Christopher Turner, or are you saying his death wasn't motivated by revenge?" Robinson asked, listening to himself. "I can answer yes to both of these questions," I replied. "Damn it," Robinson muttered. "I need to remember to ask one question at a time." At that moment, a uniformed officer entered the kitchen, holding a large pistol in his hands and waving it in front of Detective Robinson's astonished eyes. "I found this in the gun safe in the basement." The officer gave me a stern look. "Are you going to mark this as evidence and admit it?" "Great idea," Robinson replied enthusiastically. "Be sure to submit your fingerprints to the laboratory. The owner of these fingerprints is either a cold-blooded killer or the biggest fool in the world," the officer muttered, blushing slightly as he walked out, clutching my magnum with one hand and donuts with the other. The filling has already started to ooze out of them. The detective chuckled as he noticed the strawberry filling dripping from Vanessa's nose onto the kitchen table next to a box of donuts. "Turner was shot with a .44 caliber Magnum pistol. Do you have one, Mr. Yang?" I remembered that one evening I saw a .44 Magnum at Douglas Lewis's. It got me thinking. As you know, jealous husbands can be both ruthless and deadly. That's when I realized that I needed a firearm as reliable as Douglas's, in case he decided to fight me in a fit of anger. Not all men are as understanding as I am, so I went and bought one. "We have both a motive and a weapon," Robinson chuckled. "Now we just need the right moment." "I think you spent a quiet evening at home with your wife." "In fact, I spent most of the night in Jill Lewis's bed, or rather in her marital bed. I left at 11:12 at night and went straight home. Vanessa was already asleep when I arrived. I'm not sure Jill will remember the time because she was in a state of heavy intoxication when I left," I added. "It's very convenient. You remember the exact moment of your departure, but Mrs. Lewis was too engrossed to remember anything and your wife was asleep when you returned. I almost hesitate to ask, but how did you manage to remember the exact time when you left the Lewis house?" Robinson asked. "Her husband sent a message to my answering machine while I was having fun with his wife. He mentioned that he was on his way home from the airport, and it was 10:12 p.m. According to my calculations, the earliest he can come home will be around 11:12 p.m., so I tried to leave before that time. On my way home, I noticed his car driving through their neighborhood. If you left at 11:12 p.m., as you claim, then you had more than enough time to get to Turner's house and shoot him when he opened the door," the detective said with a pleased tone in his voice. "I believe we have enough evidence to arrest you for murder, Mr. Yang." The moment he reached for the handcuffs, his cell phone rang. Robinson signaled one of the officers to follow him outside for a private conversation. He was gone for almost 10 minutes. From the look on his face when he returned, everything was clear. Damn it! Detective Harry just got a full confession out of Douglas Lewis. He stated that upon arriving home from the airport, he found his wife asleep, intoxicated and covered in various liquids. He was confused when he noticed a wallet on the floor next to her unconscious body. It belonged to Christopher Turner. He took his gun and went to Turner, making a hole in it big enough for a cat to crawl through. He initially denied everything, but eventually surrendered under interrogation by Harry. "Do you know how Christopher Turner's wallet ended up on the floor of Lewis's bedroom?" asked Robinson. I answered quietly, "I have no idea, Robinson. He often left it on the bedside table next to the bed. I caught a glimpse of her a couple of times when I was with his wife. I can't understand how he or someone else could have left it at the Lewis house by accident. Apparently, one of your wife's lovers is facing a long prison sentence for the murder of her other lover. And all this time you were with their wives much more often than they were with yours, even if there were two of them. Right now, your wife is here in a kind of daze, burying her head in a box of jelly donuts." The only thing I replied was that it was sweeter that way. When the detective and the police left my house, my wayward wife threw herself at my feet, begging for forgiveness. My revenge was sweet, but it wasn't enough for me. All this time I imagined how I would put her out on the street without the means to exist. I made us bankrupt in advance. All our savings were allegedly lost, but only I knew where they were. My revenge was completed when this cheater cried at the door and begged for forgiveness. But I was determined. Now we need to move on, but without her. My 26-year marriage has come to an end. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. "Michael, don't forget about tonight's banquet," my wife exclaimed, her voice rising as she hurried out the door. "This is very important for my career," I reassured her. "Don't worry, I'll be there." After finishing my porridge, I put the dishes in the sink and put my mobile phone on the table, a symbol of my intention to disconnect for a while. I rushed upstairs and changed out of my work suit for comfortable golf clothes. After throwing my clubs and shoes in the car, I went to meet a couple of old friends at a picturesque golf course about 100 miles from the city. We had an appointment at 11:30 p.m., and a crisp autumn day promised to be perfect for a round of golf. Some events in life are simply priceless. We finished the game around 3:30 p.m. and headed to the clubhouse, where laughter and camaraderie reigned. It's been a long time since I've seen Anthony and Elliot, my two college buddies, and our reunion was a great success. We had a hearty dinner, reminisced about the past, and shared stories that were as fresh as an autumn breeze. The fun was so contagious that we decided to make a few more holes before it got dark. "That was fantastic!" exclaimed Anthony, wiping sweat from his forehead when we were done. "Do you have to hurry, or can you join us for another drink, Michael?" I chuckled. Am I ever going to give up a drink, especially from such a generous loser? "Let's go to the local bar." We settled into our favorite bar, sipping cold beers and telling stories about our glory days. I was amazed at how much I enjoyed myself and how much I would like to see Anthony and Elliot more often. But as I approached the house, a threatening cloud began to hang over my good mood. I had already imagined how a storm would break out in my relationship with Elizabeth. Imagining her fury, I giggled to myself at the absurdity of my thoughts. She will undoubtedly be waiting for me. "Where the hell did you go?" she will demand as soon as I enter the door. When I finally entered the living room, her words rang out in full voice. "I told you that this banquet is very important to me. You should have been home by 6. "I'm sorry, my love. My boss sent me on business. There were terrible traffic jams, and so I just got back," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "You know, I talked to Jeffrey. He was at home at 7:30. According to him, you took time off from work, and you left your cell phone on the kitchen table so I couldn't reach you." Elizabeth raised her voice with each accusation. "You're a terrible liar and a lousy lover." "Well, since we've figured it out, I give up, dear," I said with a tired smile. "I'm exhausted." "Is it decided?" "What's been decided?" she snapped, her eyes flashing with indignation. By this point, Elizabeth was tired of playing charade. "You're lying to me, Michael. Will you try to tell the truth for once?" I sighed. preparing for the wild fairy tale that had become my reality. Okay, let's get started. I was kidnapped along with the car by a gang of pirates. They took me to some dilapidated warehouse, planning to hold me for ransom. But then aliens appeared out of nowhere, dragged me onto their plane and began to probe me. Well, let's just say they were especially interested in my teeth, eyes, and other sensitive areas. Elizabeth stared at me with an expression of disbelief on her face. Do you think I'll believe that? Honestly, it's true. As soon as they left me alone, I managed to free myself from the ropes that bound me. And then the real tests began. It was necessary to understand how to control their spacecraft. Anyway, I accidentally landed in an unknown place. From there, I had to hitchhike to my car with a truck driver. But I feel surprisingly good, just a little tired. Elizabeth's expression changed from disbelief to pure disappointment. It seemed like it was about to explode. Michael, what are you talking about? Stop talking nonsense. Do you even realize how much that banquet meant to me? I was promoted and you were supposed to be my +1. It was very awkward to show up without you. I actually played golf with Anthony and Elliot, my old college buddies, I admitted, waving off her outrage. At first they had me at gunpoint, but on the 7th hole I smashed them 30 feet. I've been on a roll ever since. Is this a new putter? It's just a masterpiece. I swear I'm hitting 300 yards. Playing golf? Elizabeth repeated, disbelief in her voice. You knew how important this dinner was to me and you decided to play golf instead? Did you really plan everything in advance? I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, so I cheated a little. I thought maybe you wouldn't find out, I confessed, trying to justify myself. I don't recognize it? Do you think I won't notice the empty chair next to me? Elizabeth fired back, her anger palpable. Why did you decide that I wouldn't be offended by your absence from such an important event? You should have known what it meant to me. After pausing, I realized the depth of my mistake. If you look back, I probably should have seen this coming, I muttered, still overwhelmed by the whirlwind of emotions bubbling between us. At that moment, I felt exciting and undeniably different. Events were unfolding in a whirlwind, and the last thing I wanted to do was hurt you. It's just golf, I thought, nothing personal. Are you out of your mind? Or did you and your old buddy overdo it a little bit, Michael? Elizabeth replied, her eyes narrowed. You sound like you're in another universe. To be honest, I'm too exhausted to deal with your selfish antics today. You can spend the night in one of the old children's rooms, she continued, her voice cold and distant. Don't even think about touching me or talking to me for a while. No problem, dear, I replied, dropping to an exaggerated whisper. I'll be as quiet as a mouse. Elizabeth stared at me as if I were some kind of strange creature she had never encountered before. Heading to Kevin's room, I couldn't help but chuckle. After 24 years of marriage and 2 college kids, Elizabeth and I were sailing the uncharted waters of an empty nest. I settled into Kevin's bed and dozed off, while the events of the day repeated themselves in my head like a broken record. When morning came, I was getting dressed for work, reading the newspaper and eating cereal when Elizabeth came into the room with an expression of irritation and determination. Be careful, Michael, don't think I've dealt with you, she warned, her voice firm. You still have a lot to do if you hope to catch up on yesterday. And just so you know, I'll be working late tonight so you can start your penance by cooking dinner for yourself. Of course, honey, I replied, trying not to strain myself. I'll do fine. Have a good time. What do you mean, have a good time? She pressed, raising her eyebrows. Have a great day. Be happy. Don't worry about me. And beware of wooden nickels, I added with a casual shrug. After giving me a look that could curdle milk, she turned on her heel and went to work. I picked up the phone and called the office, pretending to be sick to get a day off. This morning started with an impromptu shopping trip. In the store, I came across the main temptation, the largest flat-screen TV imaginable. I couldn't resist and immediately ordered it with same-day delivery. By the evening, everything was ready, and I leaned back in my chair to watch the news. The female presenter looked so real that I tried to look into her cleavage, confident that she was right here in the room with me. The living room was dominated by the TV, a colossal presence blocking access to the closet, but it was worth every penny. I called a few friends from work, invited them to the opening of the World Series, and ordered pizza and ribs at one of the local establishments. During the third goal, Elizabeth came into the room, and her expression was priceless. Completely amazed, she stood speechless. Harry's accountant, as opportunistic as ever, jumped to his feet to greet her. "Congratulations on the improvement. This TV is simply amazing. The old man is lucky to have a wife like you," he exclaimed, and his enthusiasm echoed through the room. Elizabeth's confused gaze darted between me and the game, and I couldn't help but grin, feeling a mixture of mischief and triumph. "Thank you." Elizabeth paused, a note of uncertainty in her voice. "I'm really tired, so I'll leave you to watch the game and go to bed." "What's the matter?" To my surprise, she seemed to take the news calmly. I wondered how furious she would be in the morning. I was already dressed for work, sipping coffee and looking through the morning newspaper, when Elizabeth burst into the kitchen. "Get that damn thing out of here and get back to the store before I get back from work tonight. Michael, can you hear me?" "I hear you, dear," I replied with a playful grin. "Don't shout, I'm not deaf." When the door slammed shut, its frame shook as if the glass might break. Sometimes it was hard to keep up with her. That evening, I was sitting comfortably before the game when Elizabeth burst into the living room. "I thought I asked you to return this thing today," she began, raising her voice. "In response, you said that you heard me and that I didn't need to raise my voice. And so I come home, and she's still here? What part of it didn't you understand, you idiot?" To be honest, I didn't get it. To be honest, I've never understood how attractive Norm is in this show. He's not even that funny. Indignation turned her face crimson, and foam and saliva almost gushed out of her mouth. "Michael, hear me. I wanted you to return the TV, but you didn't." "I didn't buy this thing to return it, dear." I couldn't help but smile. "I like him, and I'm going to keep him." I leaned back, enjoying the moment. "I understood every word you said this morning. In fact, the fact is that I just decided not to follow your orders, and nothing more." A look of disbelief appeared in Elizabeth's eyes. "What's happened to you lately, Michael? First you miss an important event under some ridiculous pretext, and then you immediately order this huge, certainly expensive TV without even discussing it with me. Are you all right?" There was a note of genuine concern in her voice. "I feel great, dear. Thank you for the question." I chuckled softly. "If I had told you about the TV, you would have refused right away. It was easier for me that way. No need to argue, no need to worry. And the great thing is, it doesn't hurt anyone. Except for me, of course." "Besides you, Michael?" she asked incredulously. But I grinned. "No one, dear. Just me." "I'm in terrible pain," snarled Elizabeth, her displeasure palpable. "It really annoys me. The thing is just too big for this room. I can't even put a vacuum cleaner in here. As a result, you spent a fortune on something that wasn't even suitable for our house and didn't even think to consult me. Why do you believe that it won't hurt anyone? You know, when you say that, it's like you don't understand anything. I can't just do what makes me happy without thinking about how it will affect you." "Really, Michael? You've never done anything like this before? So why do I have to teach you the same thing all the time?" asked Elizabeth, desperation creeping into her voice. "You're acting like a narcissistic boy." "Yes, I know you're right," I admitted, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll return the TV on Monday," I offered weakly. "I'd like you to do it tomorrow," she insisted. "I have to work for a few hours in the afternoon." "Working on a Saturday is frustrating, of course, but it's thanks to her that I got a promotion," Elizabeth reasoned, her tone softening a little. "Please, just make sure he's gone by the time I get back tomorrow night." "Of course," I nodded, but my thoughts flowed in different directions. I stared at the TV, lost in thoughts of the star of my daydreams. On Saturday afternoon, I decided to call Elizabeth's parents and invite them to lunch. When I arrived at the cafe, I introduced them to Barbara Wright, who was already waiting for me. Barbara looked exhausted, and I wondered how she was coping. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's parents seemed much more interested in the free lunch I was giving them than in anything else. At about 3 o'clock, we followed Barbara to her house and parked at the entrance. Barbara received us in her beautifully decorated living room, but the atmosphere quickly changed when she approached the security console. After a few quick taps, the room erupted into a cacophony of sirens warning all intruders to flee. The sudden noise sent chills down our backs. Before we could react, the front door burst open, and Barbara's husband Robert jumped out with a bat at the ready. The man was completely naked, confusion and adrenaline mixed in his behavior. He didn't recognize me or Elizabeth's parents, and swung the bat in our direction with wild eyes. "Get out of here before I knock your brains out!" he shouted, panic and aggression mixed in his voice. There was tension in the room, and we all froze, caught off guard. "Go to the devil!" he shouted, pulling the bat back as if preparing to swing. For a moment, I thought about giving it to him. Then a shrill scream shattered the tension. "What are you doing here?" Elizabeth's parents turned away from the sight of the naked baseball player, their gazes fixed on Elizabeth, who was standing in the doorway, clutching a sheet to her body, shock and embarrassment reflected on her face. "I invited them to have some fun, Mrs. Nelson," Barbara interjected, walking into the room with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. Robert was not very secretive about his affairs, and I had suspicions as soon as I told him that I would be coming over for the weekend. "I even thought it would be you, Mrs. Nelson, considering how cozy he was with you at the banquet last night." Nodding politely to Elizabeth's parents, I was still trying to make sense of the scene unfolding in front of me. Walking up to Barbara, I shook her hand, then turned my attention to Elizabeth's boss, Robert, and only then did I meet Elizabeth's gaze. "You know what? There's a game tonight, and I'm not going to miss it on my big screen. When you're done here, you'll take your parents home." "Right. Elizabeth?" I added, raising an eyebrow. "I think they won't mind. Give me a minute to grab some things during the commercial, although the TV is banned." As soon as the match was over, I gathered Elizabeth's clothes and carried them into the living room. When Elizabeth entered the room, her face expressed a mixture of defiance and despair as she examined the pile of her belongings. "Michael, don't do this, please. It was just a novel and nothing more. I never wanted you to get hurt." "You shouldn't have found out." "Why didn't I notice this empty chair?" I snapped, pointing out the glaring absence. "This marriage meant everything to me, and you just left him for an affair." "But I love you, not him at all," she pleaded, despair filling her voice. "Perhaps this is really the case. Or maybe not," I replied, my heart pounding wildly from the weight of her words. "It doesn't make any sense now, does it? When I decided to play golf during that big event that meant so much to you, you were furious. Those were your words, not mine. But isn't sleeping with the boss worse than making a couple of holes, Elizabeth? I'm the only one who really suffers." "But you have no idea, Michael. Dad threw a torrent of humiliation at me. They think I'm some kind of desperate girl, and now I can't even work with Robert." "Shouldn't we forget about my little indiscretion?" Elizabeth pleaded, her voice trembling with despair. "Your affair with another man? This can be ignored," I replied, keeping my tone even. Soon, tears flowed down her cheeks as I continued. "Lies, betrayal, broken trust. These are the real obstacles. You've been getting a taste of this pain from me lately. It's unbearable to coexist with such a person, isn't it? Take your things with you, Elizabeth. My lawyer will contact you on Monday. You can keep it, but you're not welcome here anymore. Forgiving cheater." Our marriage was broken into small pieces. Just like Bradley, thanks to our prenuptial agreement, she was left with what she came into our marriage with. I didn't just make her family hate her, I left this woman with nothing. Now she's officially broke. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.